Okay, so I'm back to our project that we did here 2 videos ago, and this video we're gonna style this. Okay, so let's go see this. And if this looks a little bit different than it looked a video ago or 2 videos ago when I did this, is because it might be a little bit different. I think the alt tag's a little different because I just copied this from my source. So it might be a little bit different than the one I made a video ago. Okay, so the first thing we want to do here to style this is let's make a div tag. Now a div tag, what is a div tag? A div tag stands for divider, and it's basically just used to divide your page into like segments that you can style separately. So I just want to put everything in the div tag, just like that. And I don't want to give this a class, but I'll give it an ID of main. So an ID is like a class, except there could only be one element in your page with a specific ID. So classes were used to sort of group elements together within a specific class. You could be selecting multiple things with a class selector. With an ID selector, you're always just selecting that one element. So an ID selector looks like this. You put this symbol right here, followed by the name of your ID. So main, and this will select this whole element. Okay, I'm not gonna do anything in here just yet. First thing I want to do is I want to make the font look a bit better. So to do that, I'm going to go to Google Fonts and import a font directly into my web project. So the one I want, let's see if I can search it. It's this one. So just select it, select the plus sign, it brings it up down here. Okay, so to add this font into your project, just copy this link tag and then just put it in the head. And now you have access to this font. And it also gives you the declaration here. So let's just take the body and put the font like that. So we're setting the font to the Joel Malhari font that we have access to because of this. We're like importing it here from Google Fonts. Let's look at this. It should look a lot better. It does. It looks a lot better. Notice one thing, that the read more, the button didn't update its font, and that's because the button doesn't inherit the font from the body. So you'd have to go like this. Also, inputs, when we're working with forms, inputs also don't inherit the font from the body. So you'll commonly see me do something like body, button, and input. Although we're not going to have any inputs here, so I guess we don't need this. But you'll see that a lot because the buttons and inputs, they don't inherit the font from the body, so you have to select them separately. And now if we look at the button, it should have that font. Okay, now let's go to the main here. So everything that we have is in the main. So we can style the main. We can make the width be 50%. Let's see what that does. Okay, so a bit better, I guess. And now what I want to do is I want to center it. So I'm not going to explain exactly how this works in this video. I'll explain it later on in this section. But we're going to use something called margin. And we're going to set 40 pixels on top. And then we're going to set the again, I don't expect you to completely understand this right now because I'm going to make a video dedicated to this in a little while. But for now, you could just copy what I'm doing. And just trust that this will center this whole container here. Remember that main is everything, and it's going to get pushed to the center like that. Okay, so I think this is already starting to look a lot better. Let's go back down here. Okay, now let's select the H1. Font weight to normal and font size to 48 pixels. You could change the sizes to whatever you want. Okay, so I think that looks a bit better. Okay, now the image. So a few videos ago when we made the image, we used the height attribute. That's usually not something you want to do. The height attribute is a really old school attribute. It's been around since the beginning of HTML. It's historically you could use it to size your images, but with modern web development, you usually always want to do that with CSS. So I was only explaining that because it's kind of good to know, and we didn't know CSS at the beginning of this section. But now that we do, let's do that. Let's set the width, not the height this time, although we could set the height, but we're going to set the width of the image with CSS. So let's just set the width to 100%. So what that means is it's going to set it to be 100% of the size of its container. So its container is basically its parent. So the div, you can think of the div as like having children, because the div has elements inside of it. So you would say the div is the parent to the h1, the p tag, and the p tag is also a parent because the p tag has an a tag inside of it. So the p tag has a child a tag, and okay, let's go back to the div. The div has a child br, a child h2, and a child image. So when you set the image to be 100, the width 100%, it becomes 100% of its parent's width. And up here, we're setting the width to be 50% of its parent's width. This might get a little bit confusing right now because it's going all over the place. But the main is a child to the body. So the main is 50% the size of the body. That's why if you look at my screen size, this whole thing right here is about 50% the size of the body, except it's in the middle. So there's a column here and a column here. But if you made this to be 90% of the size, it'll be basically the size of the body. And notice how the image now is 100% the size of its container, which is the main, which we just made a lot bigger. So if you change the size of the main, the image will get smaller too. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And now let's select the h1, the h2, and the p tag. Select them all and just say text align center. So that just made the text be all center. Okay, cool. So this is almost done. Two things I want to do is I want to make the link look a bit better. So let's just set the color of the link to blue. There, you can see that. Okay, and the last step is the button. So the button is actually requires a lot more styling, because buttons by default, there's just a lot to them. They have borders, they have background colors, they, it's a bit harder to style them. There's a lot you have to undo of the browser styling. So first, let's make so again, some of the stuff that I'm going to use in styling the button, I haven't explained yet, and I'm not going to completely explain what's going on in this video, but in a few videos from now, before the end of the section, you're going to understand everything that you see here. So if you don't completely understand it, don't worry about it. Just copy what I'm doing and it'll work. So the first thing, similar to before, we're going to center the button with the margin auto. And this actually isn't going to work right away. So the reason why it's not working, because when we centered the div, the main, the div is what's known as a block element. And I'm going to give a whole video to block and inline elements a couple videos from now. Basically, in order to center something with auto, it needs to be a block element. So let's make this a block element. Set the display to block. And now it's in the center. Okay, cool. And let's set the font size to 19 pixels. Okay, you still see that it still kind of looks like the default button. So let's set the border to none. That might make it look a bit weird. It looks kind of cool. I think it looks a bit better. Let's set some padding to it. Again, I'll give a whole video dedicated to padding and margin, but for now, just go with it. Okay, so that basically makes the element bigger. It just adds space to it. And now let's set a background color to 222. This is just a shorthand for 6.2s, so you can save some time doing that. Okay, so it made it really dark. So now you want the text to be white, so just put white. And also let's set a border radius. So a border radius will give the corners, won't be as sharp. So 5 pixels. Like this. Okay, so this is basically done, except I want to show you one more thing. It's actually really quick. And that is, if you want to make the button look a bit different when it's being hovered over, you can do that very simply in CSS just by adding a, this is what's known as a pseudo class or a pseudo selector. So whatever you style right here will only be active while the button is being hovered over. So you can make it transparent a bit, you put the opacity. So let's just do 8. So now when you hover over the button, you'll be able to see that you're hovering over it. And you could change that if you want. You could change it to like 3. And you could change anything you want too. You could make the button bigger. You could, you could make the font size bigger. Do 24 pixels. Make the button bigger. You can do whatever you want when you hover over it. Whatever you could style in here, you could style the same in here. Okay, so let's look at this one more time. Alright, looks pretty good.